This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this talk I'd like to begin an extremely important discussion with homeschooling parents. What I'm about to get into in this talk is a subject, a concept that I believe can radically change homeschooling and allow it to become what it's capable of being. Homeschooling has not fulfilled its potential, and the reason why is because ever since homeschooling became popular in the 1990s, it's really been little more than a means by which parents, primarily Christian parents, have sought to guide their children through the modern high school diploma requirements at home. It's really just public school at home. The end result is a high school diploma, a high school transcript, and the kids go off either to college or to work. But this really isn't what homeschooling can be or should be. Certainly isn't what our children need homeschooling to be. Homeschooling has just incredible potential in the 21st century, but we have to allow it to fulfill that potential. And the way that we manage homeschooling, the way that parents manage the education of their children at home, is not going to allow homeschooling to be all that it can be. And in this talk today, I'd like to introduce a fundamental concept, a radical concept, that I believe will help Catholic parents to allow homeschooling to be all that it can be, and more importantly, to make it possible for homeschooling parents to give their children the education that they need without being restricted or distracted by the modern high school diploma requirements. Now, I have to explain some challenging issues, and this is going to be difficult. I don't think this is the kind of talk that a parent is going to be able to listen to on the way to work. I think this is one that a parent is going to need to sit down in the evening and listen to with a notebook and jot down some notes, and then maybe even listen to a couple of times in order to really grasp what I'm introducing here. I'm going to try to embed this recording into an article on the Academy website where maybe I can help parents to think through it and visualize it a little more. But I think this talk is important, and I want to just get into it so we can start this discussion and parents can start reflecting on the ideas that I'm going to share, which I believe are really crucial for homeschooling parents to succeed and allow homeschooling to be all that it can be. Now, the number one problem that I want parents to focus on is that homeschooling is really little more than schooling at home in most families. And that's not what homeschooling should be. We're really just doing the work of the state for the state, or doing the work of the private school for the private school. And that's not homeschooling. Homeschooling has so much more potential, so much more freedom, so much more in terms of resources and opportunities available than schools have available to them in this generation. And we're not making use of those resources and opportunities. We're simply bringing the short-sighted, low expectation standards of modern schools home with us and leading our children through them, which is good because homeschooling can avoid a lot of the evils available in modern schools, but it's not all that homeschooling can be. really not homeschooling at all. It's just schooling at home. And I want parents to understand that home education can be much, much more than this. But parents have to learn how to handle it, how to manage it, how to think about it, and in the end, how to document it and send our kids off when they choose to leave to pursue their adult vocations in the best position possible. And I'd like to talk about that today. There are two important concepts that parents have to keep in mind all the time when they're homeschooling. These are two crucial concepts that parents have to actively work to keep in mind every day. The first is that homeschooling is the ultimate form of schooling. Many parents think of homeschooling as keeping kids home from school, and that is not how homeschooling should be thought of. Homeschooling is not an alternative to school. It's one form of schooling. It's not an alternative to school. It's not anti-schooling or this stupid unschooling talk. Homeschooling is an alternative to schooling in the simple way that it's another form of schooling. And I would say it's the ultimate form of schooling. When a parent chooses to send a child to school, the parent delegates a God-given responsibility to educate the child to the school. That's a choice a parent makes, and a parent doesn't have to make that choice. If a parent does make that choice, that parent is responsible for the education of that child, even when the child is in a school, because the parent is choosing that school. Before God, the parent is responsible for the child's education, and the choice to send the child to school is only just, only reasonable when that school teaches what the parent believes. If the school doesn't teach what the parent believes, how in the world can a parent justify sending a child to that school? Homeschooling is real schooling. It's the ultimate form of schooling because in homeschooling, parents do not delegate education to a third party. Parents assume the work of educating their children directly. It's the ultimate and ideal form of education. Now, the circumstances of a particular family may make it less ideal than other options. But all things being equal, homeschooling is the ideal form of education. It has the most potential, the greatest potential, I should say. Homeschooling is a real model of education. No one should be embarrassed by homeschooling. No one should feel they need to explain away homeschooling. It's simply one form of schooling. We can send a child to a public school, we can send a child to a private school, or we can educate our children at home. That's what homeschooling is. The second thing I'd like for parents to keep in mind is that parents who are homeschooling are real school administrators. Parents who are homeschooling are real school administrators. So if you think back to when you went to school, if you attended a public school or a private school, and you think back to the principal of that school, that's you. You're the principal of your children's school if you homeschool. You're the principal. Think back and remember the guidance counselors. Think back and remember the assistant principals. Think back and remember the teachers. That's you. As the homeschooling parent, you are a real school administrator. You are a real school teacher. And you have to understand what you are, and you have to be what you are. Most parents don't think of themselves as school administrators. They think school administrators are in school. and they ignore the fact that their homeschool is a real school, and they are real school administrators. And just as a school principal makes decisions about the school that he manages, and teachers make decisions about the classes that they teach, you have the authority legally to make those same decisions in the education of your own children. A third issue that I should raise, I didn't intend to talk about this, but it comes to mind as I discuss this, is that accreditation has nothing to do with homeschooling. Accreditation recommends a school to parents. Parents are the judge of whether any school is good or bad. Accreditation suggests to parents that a certain school might be good, usually based on administrative issues, not academic issues, certainly not moral or religious issues. Accreditation is usually concerned with professionalism and how a school is managed and things like that. It has very, very little to do with the actual academic content or quality of instruction available from any school. But parents in homeschooling have no need of accreditation because they are the ultimate accreditors. They are the ultimate judge of the quality of any school program. And in their homeschool, whatever they decide to do as their school program, that's the rule, because they are real school administrators in a real school. Parents have that freedom, that responsibility, and they need to carry it out diligently and proudly, taking responsibility for the education of their children themselves and managing that education directly. So let's say 3 things to keep in mind. First, that your homeschool is a real school. Second, that you as a homeschooling parent are a real school administrator. And the third point was that you have no need of accreditation because it's your school. Now, if you can keep those things in mind, you'll begin to be able to think about homeschooling in the way that you need to think about homeschooling. You'll be able to think about homeschooling with the freedom that you need for homeschooling to fulfill its potential. You won't feel that you're inside some box created by other people and that you need to do what other people tell you to do, or you need to do things using certain materials or using certain methods that other school administrators, that other schools have decided to use or happen to use. If you understand that your homeschool is a real school and that you, the homeschooling parent, are a real school administrator, you'll be able to think as you need to think about homeschooling your children. You'll be able to engage with this work with the freedom that you need in order to allow homeschooling to fulfill its potential. And in order for you to understand what I'm going to introduce to you in this talk, you need to enter into homeschooling with this sense of freedom and responsibility, the sense of authority, that you have the right to do what's best for your children, and you don't need to fit into any certain boxes or molds that happen to exist in modern schools. You need to enter into homeschooling free, with a blank sheet of paper, as it were, on which you're going to write your goals for your children's education, and then you're going to fulfill those goals with the freedom that's yours as a homeschooling parent. Now, once you can think about homeschooling in that way, it's easy to think about what we can do with our children day by day based on goals that we have. For example, what are my goals for my own children's education? My number one goal is that my children learn the Catholic faith. And that doesn't mean that I make my children Catholics. That's impossible. And anyone who suggests that denies the gospel. No one can be a Catholic without the grace of God. Catholic life is not something that's brought about by education. Education may be an instrument that God uses to lead someone to saving faith, but education has no power in itself to make any person a Christian. If it did, we wouldn't need Christ to come into the world. We wouldn't need the Holy Spirit. We could just create the best schools, and once we got the right formula figured out for schools, we would just convert everybody. Obviously, that's not how religion works, and we should never talk about education as some kind of means by which Christianity is produced in children. That's not true. Our duty is not to make our children Christians. Our job is to make our children disciples. We're to make our children learners in the Catholic Church. We do this through the sacrament of baptism. We introduce them to the Catholic life. We introduce them to the teachings of the Catholic Church, and that's all that we can do. We can't make them embrace those teachings. We can't make them believe in those teachings. Our duty is simply to present the teaching of the Catholic faith, to introduce them to the liturgical life, and to model that life for them, and to pray that God would give them grace and cause them to believe and be saved. So goal number one for my own education in my children is to teach them the Catholic faith and to model that faith for them. Secondly, I want my children to be taught classical philosophy. I want my children to know the way to wisdom. And so that requires a classical liberal arts education, that requires an education in classical philosophy. And that education is the second goal that I have for my children as a homeschooling family. And then third, in addition to those two general things, I want to help my children successfully prepare for and transition into their adult vocations, whatever they may be. So I have these three goals in homeschooling my children: to teach them the Catholic faith, to introduce them to classical philosophy, and to help them prepare for and transition successfully into their adult vocations. Those are my three goals. I need freedom to pursue those goals with my children. I cannot order a box curriculum. I cannot enroll them in a school. There's no simple solution to this work that's before me as a Catholic parent. It's very difficult work. It's exhausting. It requires many years of sustained effort in order to fulfill these goals. And I've got to do it in a realistic way. I can't do it in some artificial way. I don't want to create some Montessori version of Christianity where kids pretend to be Christians. I have to raise them in the reality of the Christian life itself. We don't need to sit at home and dress up like priests and create a fake altar. We can go to Mass and participate in the real sacraments. We don't need to pretend to be a family or to pretend to be working. We don't need to pretend to have some kind of chores to do. We can do real family work together in real family business. We can participate in these things directly. We don't need to create artificial copies of them in a school. As a homeschooling family, we can deal with the realities directly. That's the ultimate benefit of homeschooling. We don't need to create artificial school environments. We can participate in real-life activities and works directly in homeschooling. That's one of its greatest benefits. But what all of this depends on is a freedom to do this all day, every day, based on the opportunities and privileges and providences given to us. We have to have freedom to do this. And as our lives vary from family to family, our homeschooling activities need to vary from family to family. There's no cookie cutter. that can be sold to families where we can say, do this and you'll fulfill your responsibility as a parent. That's baloney. That's an easy sale for some company trying to make money, but that's not what the education of children requires. Our families are different. Our connections are different. Our resources are different. Our own education is different. But the goals should be the same. The process by which we fulfill those goals is going to be different. That's why we need to protect this freedom in homeschooling, because our families individually have different needs, different opportunities, different resources, and so on. Homeschooling needs to be able to look different from house to house. Now, as I said, my goals in homeschooling, to teach my children the Catholic faith, to introduce my children to classical philosophy, and to help them prepare and transition into adult vocations, I think can be shared by all homeschooling families. The goals, as I said, don't change from family to family, but the means by which we fulfill those goals has to adapt to what each family can do, has the opportunity to do. That's the challenge of homeschooling. Now, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I've laid out the curriculum, the only curriculum, as far as the content of this education goes, the content of the education that teaches the Catholic faith and introduces students to classical philosophy. As far as that curriculum goes, as the content is concerned, there aren't 1,000 different options. In fact, there aren't even 2 different options. There's one option. The only option that has ever existed in the history of the Christian Church has been the classical liberal arts curriculum and the study of classical philosophy and scholastic theology. That's the only system of education that the Church has ever commended to us, that the doctors of the Church have commended to us, that modern popes, like Pope Leo XIII and Pope Pius X, have commended to us. There's no other system of education recommended to us other than this system of education, which we've worked to restore in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I recommend it to all families. This curriculum serves the goals that I mentioned, which can be shared by all Catholic families. But this curriculum, even though it provides all families with the same studies, does so in a way that allows for variation from one family to the next, even from one student to the next. It's one curriculum, but it's flexible enough to allow for different families and different individual students to successfully pursue and fulfill the goals of classical Catholic education. The courses are all self-paced, so students don't have to work at a common pace. Individual students who are gifted intellectually can move quickly. Individual students who are less gifted intellectually can enjoy the same education at their own reduced pace. It allows for all students to receive the same excellent education at their own pace. It's also affordable. A wealthy family can add services and resources and different other features, can subscribe to premium enrollments and get additional benefits, but still have the same education as a poorer family that can't afford those things, but is willing to do the work to guide their children through the curriculum at their own pace for a lower tuition or even no tuition at all. And of course, we're willing to help. Parents can communicate with us to request help, but my point is that our program is not intended for a certain economic class alone and just sends all other people away. Our program is designed so it's affordable for everyone. So whether the children have different ability levels, whether families have different financial resources, we make the classical Catholic curriculum available to everyone. But there still needs to be freedom in homeschooling because every child and every household is different. I have 10 children. Every one of them is different. We have some children who are brilliant. We have other children who are barely literate because their interests and abilities are so different. And they have different vocations ahead of them, and they all have the opportunity to serve God in useful ways. We don't judge the children based on their differences. We simply understand that God has a different intention for their lives, and we see the benefits of their lives work out individually when we don't try to cram them all into the same box as modern schools do. We leave room for difference. We leave room for divine providence, and yet we pursue the same goals. And it's that flexibility that's required for homeschooling to be effective. Now, none of that is what I actually wanted to talk about. That's not the important idea that I want to share in this discussion. I think those things are easy enough to understand. Parents need to understand that their homeschool is a real school. They need to understand that they are real school administrators. They need to understand that their children are going to have different individual strengths and weaknesses, and that their plan for their education has to take that into consideration. They can't simply enroll them in a modern grade level program and grade the children like meat at an inspection checkpoint. They have to educate every one of their children, and the children are different. God doesn't allow education to be this lazy activity where some lazy teacher issues the same exact program to every individual child and just labels the child as, disabled, A, C, F, B+, D, disabled through the crowd. That's not education. That's just inspection. And that's what modern schools do. That's not fulfilling the responsibility that parents have to educate their children. So once we understand that we have this common goal to fulfill, but we have to deal with this variation from child to child and from family to family, we see the need for flexibility, for freedom in understanding how to go about this. And this creates confusion for parents when they start thinking about transcripts and diplomas. And this is where I'm headed with this discussion. I want parents to learn how to think about diplomas and transcripts because almost all parents think of them wrongly in homeschooling. Let me repeat that. Homeschooling parents need to think about diplomas and transcripts differently than school administrators do. Because what they're doing in a homeschool is not what the schools are doing. The schools have one program that they offer to all of the children. The children go through that program, and at the end of that program, the school simply gives them a grade. Homeschooling doesn't do that. And so when we approach transcripts and diplomas, homeschooling parents need to think about these things differently. And homeschooling parents in most modern homeschool programs don't do this. And the kids suffer for it. This error in thinking of transcripts and diplomas like modern school transcripts and diplomas causes homeschool students to suffer and penalizes them for being homeschooled. And this is what I'd like to get into for the rest of this talk. When you went to school, you looked up at the teacher and the school building and the textbooks and the guidance counselors and the principals as this giant system, this giant administrative system, almost like a system of government over you in education. You saw this organized system of studies and courses and schedules, and you saw this massive system, this organized system that resulted in report cards and progress reports and transcripts and diplomas and data about your studies. And you had this image in your mind as a student of this big system. And you imagined it to be something real, something permanent and lasting, something that was institutionalized and real, not like you, something bigger than you, more lasting and permanent than you, something more real than you. You were just someone participating in this system. In fact, this idea that students have is so strong that teachers can falsely warn children that they can punish them by putting this or that on their quote-unquote permanent record. But there is no such thing as a permanent record. It's this idea of what the school is that children have that's completely false. It's like the Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Tin Man get to the wizard, and they see this big, terrifying wizard, this giant green image in front of them with smoke and fire and all this, and they imagine this system, and all of the people in Oz are telling them about the wizard, and there's this whole society in place leading up to the wizard. And when we're in public schools or even in private schools, we imagine that we're standing in the presence of this giant system. And yet when they got into the presence of the wizard, accidentally, Toto, the dog, ran over to the side and noticed something moving, and he grabbed a hold of a curtain that was moving, and he pulled it out of the way, and Dorothy and the others could see that there was just a man playing with a machine that produced all kinds of special effects, that there was no wizard at all. There was no system of rewards and punishments that this wizard distributed to the people. The wizard was a myth, and the wizard could only exist if people believed that there was a wizard. But when they looked behind the curtain and saw the man playing with the controls and creating all these effects, Dorothy rebuked him and yelled at him and told him that he was a wicked man. That image of the Wizard of Oz is what we need to keep in mind when we think about modern schools. They're not what they appear to children to be. And when those children grow up and become parents themselves, they often continue to think about schools in the same way, that the school is some kind of big, powerful, timeless, permanent institution, and they're some little outsider, some little mouse, hoping to get something from this big school. And it's no such thing. When you actually work in a school, behind the scenes, you get to see how things really work. You get to see how the school presents this facade to students and parents. You get to see how things are really organized. You get to see how courses are really administered, how lessons are prepared, where tests and grades and report cards come from. You get to see this from the other side, and you see that it's nothing like you thought it was when you were a student. It's nothing like what the parents on the outside think that it is. When a school hires a teacher, the teacher is responsible for teaching a certain course. The teacher usually chooses the book that's used. The teacher usually creates the syllabus that's followed in the course. The teacher creates the assignments and the tests and the quizzes. The teacher assigns the grades. And at the end of the semester, at the end of the year, a grade is put onto a report card, and everything looks so official, so standardized. But it's not so. That grade on the report card is the judgment of an individual person. It's not the judgment of the school. It's not the output of some complex data system that analyzes all of a student's work. Many of the grades given by the teacher are arbitrary. They're based on quizzes or assignments or tests that the teachers made up themselves. There are no objective standards. The standards are relative to the teacher. You can have two different teachers both teaching an 11th grade English class with two completely different outcomes. Nobody knows. Nobody tracks that sort of thing. Nobody keeps schools accountable for the variation from one teacher to another, from one class to another, from one school to another. All of the variation that exists in the schools is behind the scenes and kept out of view. The students and the parents, they get a hint of it sometimes, but there's usually not much that they can do. Again, I learned this as a school teacher as I watched my fellow teachers and what they did and how they handled their business and how they managed their classes. And behind the scenes, you see what a sham it all is. So when we come into this as homeschooling parents, we need to not think that we're just these random individuals. Our opinions don't matter. Our judgments don't matter. But these schools have all of this official, standardized, organized, systematized student data and results and numbers. And we wonder, how in the world am I going to give my children a diploma or a report card or a transcript? And the answer is, you're going to do it in the same way that the teachers do it. You're going to give your children grades the same way that the teachers give their students grades. You're going to make up the courses and the lessons the same way that the teachers do. There's no system. There's no official standards. It's all individual. It's all personal judgments. And you have the freedom to do the same thing in your homeschool, in the education of your children. Again, you don't see all of that because it's behind the scenes in the school. But it's just individual people making their own personal judgments, writing numbers and grades in grade books, submitting those numbers to the office to be printed on the official report card or transcript. But it's just personal judgments behind the scenes. And because you are a real school administrator of a real school, you have the right and the authority to grade your children in the same way. This is not some kind of cheating. This is how school works. It's your school. You're the school administrator. They're your children. You judge what their transcript looks like. You judge what their grades are. You judge whether they've earned a high school diploma. You are the school administrator, and your homeschool is a real school. Now, I know that that's a radical concept for parents to hear and think about, but it's true. And again, your ability to accept this, your ability to embrace this, is dependent on the degree to which you understand that the schools are not what they appear on the outside. The school is simply a collection of individual teachers making personal judgments in the education of your children. Their personal judgments are collected by the office and turned into what looks like some kind of formal system of grades and reports and numbers and statistics, but that's just an appearance. Behind the scenes, individual people judged your children's learning and assigned grades to it. They judged what was important and what wasn't important. They judged whether your children's answers were correct or not correct. They judged whether your child's essay was worth an A or a C. It wasn't systematic. It wasn't official. It wasn't standardized. It was personal. And if you had two children with two different teachers, they were taught and judged according to completely different standards. They were led to read different books, write on different topics, by teachers who paid attention to different points and different skills or concepts when they graded their work. They were personal judgments of your children's work, and you as the homeschool parent are the one who makes those personal judgments. And that's extremely important for you to understand. You have the right to personally judge your children's studies, to issue them report cards with grades based on your judgment, to issue them a transcript based on your judgment, to issue them a diploma based on your judgment. You are the school administrator, and your homeschool is a real school. That's a radical concept, and I know that many families are going to be uncomfortable with that, and that's what's going to ruin their homeschooling and have them just back working out of the box. But if you can understand this concept, if you can trust me, that a modern school with all of its report cards and numbers and grades and statistics is ultimately just individual people making personal judgments. If you can understand that, if you'll trust me in this, you'll be able to think rightly about your children's homeschooling. Now, we're not saying this because we're liars who are just going to make stuff up for our children, because you can't do that. You'll get caught by other measures. For example, if you give your children a transcript that looks like something Einstein might have studied, and the child has A's in every course, and you think you're so clever because you're just going to fill out a transcript with fake information and give the kid all A's, and the kid goes and takes the SAT and bombs on the SAT, everyone's going to know that your transcript is a bunch of baloney. So we're not saying you can just make stuff up. We're not going to lie about our children's work. In fact, the place in a child's life where the parent's authority becomes most evident is at this point, when the parent evaluates and judges the child's academic performance. And again, where you live in a society in which children are encouraged to disregard and disrespect their parents, where authority of parents is not respected, this idea that the parents have the ultimate word on their children's education is offensive to many people. But if we have a Christian understanding of parents, this is where the authority of parents is most clearly manifest and significant in the life of our children. Our children will stand at 18 years old. They'll have 1,000 opportunities open in front of them, and those opportunities require things that are in their parents' control. But like I said, most parents just delegate these things to schools and pretend that they've fulfilled their duties, which is a lie. And this is why children have no regard for their parents, because the parents simply ignore their duties and pass them off onto others, and the children see that, and the children say, well, if my future life actually has nothing to do with my parents, why should I even listen to my parents? And they're right. Their parents have basically surrendered their parental authority. But if parents hold on to that authority and work to fulfill those responsibilities directly, the benefits of the relationship between parents and children becomes clear in the lives of those children. For example, if I have a 17-year-old son who wants to join the military offers him a complete life, an independent adult life, a professional career in the U.S. military, 1 million different options. He can't enter into that life or take up those opportunities unless he has permission at age 17 from his parents to do so. The military respects the authority of parents. If parents homeschool their children, a child can't get a driver's license without permission from his parents. If a child wants to go to college and the parents take personal responsibility for the education of their children, admission to that college is going to depend on the parents' approval of their children's studies. And so we can see if parents would actually hold on to their responsibilities, if they would actually exercise and maintain their authority, all of the distractions of this world really can't reach our children. They go through the parents, but the parents surrender this authority and hand it over to institutions in modern society, and that sets the children free from parental authority, which is immoral. The 10 Commandments teach children, honor your father and your mother. Parents have authority and control over their children's lives, and this is how morals are enforced in society. This is how children are kept under discipline and made to be respectful to God's commandments and God's ways. But when parents simply write off or sign over these responsibilities and authorities to others, that whole system, that natural system of moral accountability is lost, and it's the parent's fault. If you as a parent hold on to that authority and work to fulfill that responsibility yourself, you'll see that it has a radical effect on your relationship with your children as they approach adulthood. Now, when it's time for all of this work, transcripts, diplomas, and so on, parents have to know how to think about these things. And this is what I think you'll find most difficult to comprehend and wrap your mind around as a parent. But let me explain. Modern schools are not based on any kind of objective academic quality in achievement. There's no objective quality of achievement in modern schools. Modern schools give children diplomas based on time requirements. Children fulfill time requirements in modern schools, and that's how they earn diplomas. And as a homeschooling parent, you have to understand your children deserve a high school diploma when they fulfill time requirements, not objective academic requirements, time requirements. In modern high schools, there are 5 main subject areas: English, mathematics, science, social studies, and foreign language. 5 main subject areas. In order to pass a grade level, and I'm talking about high school when we're into this high school transcript and diploma preparation. In order to complete a grade level, a student is required to complete 120 hours of instructional time in each of these 5 subject areas. On a 180-day school calendar, that comes out to 40 minutes per day per subject for these 5 subjects. Now think about how a school works and you'll see the truth of what I'm saying. Imagine if we started all of the children in 9th grade in the same class. And as time went on, the children started to separate themselves into different groups. There was a clear set of 20 students who were operating at the highest level. And there was another group of students, 20 students, who were operating at the lowest level, so that they couldn't continue together because the higher students were moving forward at a great pace, and the lower students were moving too slow to continue with the higher students. So what the school does is it creates 2 levels in 9th grade. And then we have this big blob of students in the middle, and the school further breaks down the student body into 3 or 4 different levels within a grade level. So if we go to a modern high school, we'll find that there's a 10th grade honors English class, a 10th grade level 1 English class, a 10th grade level 1B English class, a 10th grade level 2 English class, a 10th grade level 3, and it can keep going depending on how many students there are. But the student body at that grade level is divided into levels, and all of them progress to 10th grade. All of them progress to 10th grade. And they do this because they simply sort them into different levels. And what that shows us is that these children are not promoted to 10th grade because they've all fulfilled a certain standardized academic level of achievement. They have simply fulfilled the time requirement. And if you can't fulfill that time requirement in the honors class, they'll just drop you down to level 1. And if you can't fulfill it at level 1, they'll just drop you down to level 2 until you're finally at a level where you can complete the time requirement, not continue failing every activity, and they can push you to the next grade level. And they do the same thing in 10th grade, and they do the same thing in 11th grade, and they do the same thing in 12th grade, and in the end, every student receives the diploma, even though they're in completely different levels of study in the same grade level. Because the requirement for the diploma is not some objective academic measure. It's time. The students have been in school for 120 hours for each of the subjects for 4 years, and therefore they get a diploma. Your children should get the same diploma based on time requirements, not based on any objective, standardized academic achievement. You need to make sure your children fulfill the modern high school time requirements, and when they do, you need to give them a diploma. That's how modern schools work. And don't allow yourself to be deceived by the appearance that schools give that they have some kind of standardized academic requirement in order for children to get a diploma. That's false. It's a time requirement, just like a college degree is a time requirement. You don't need to get 100% to get a college degree. You can get 65, 70% and just bum your way through classes passing, and you'll end up with a degree if you fulfill the mandatory time requirement. Not academic achievement, time requirement. And that's how the modern high school diploma works as well. So the key to this, and this is where parents who are homeschooling need to learn to think rightly about this. You need to set up a schedule for your children's homeschool studies where you can measure time spent, instructional time. And you should have it set up so that your children can fulfill 120 hours per year in the 5 major subject areas. And when they do so, give them their diploma. That's all that a diploma is, and don't let anyone try to make you think it's anything more than that in a modern school. When your children fulfill the time requirement, which is very simple to track, very simple to manage as a parent, just keep the daily schedule. 1 hour in this subject, 1 hour in this subject. Do that for the 5 high school subjects, and after 4 years, give your children their high school diploma, because that's all that a high school diploma is. It's your school, you're the administrator, you give the diploma. That's all a diploma is. Now, as for the transcript's a little more complicated. For the transcript, you need to actually list courses studied, and you should do this on a year-by-year basis. You should list the 5 modern subject areas. If you want to give your children a simple transcript, let's say for a college admission application, put the 5 standard subject areas on the transcript: freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. Make sure that the children fulfill the time requirement for each of those subjects, 120 hours. It's 40 minutes a day for 180 days. Nothing complicated, nothing difficult. See that your children fulfill that time requirement, and every day encourage your children to get as much work done as possible. That's the only standard. Get as much work done as possible. Parents ask me all the time, how many lessons should we get done? There's no such objective requirement for any diploma or high school education. There's no such requirement. You have no idea what's in the textbooks. You have no idea how much of the textbook any teacher actually covers. You have no idea what's actually on the tests, what percentage of the textbook content is actually being assessed. You have no idea. So don't allow that appearance to mislead you and cause you stress. The schools are not doing what you imagine that they're doing. Have a daily schedule for your studies and tell your children, okay, it's English time. We're going to spend the next hour working on English. So here are a number of options of specific courses that you can study. You can study English grammar, English composition, English literature. Get as much done as you can in this hour of time that we have scheduled for English. And then next period, the next hour, we have mathematics. So you say, well, we have algebra and geometry, we have trigonometry. Get started in algebra, and during this hour of math time, get as much done as you can in algebra. The next hour, we move on to history. And we say, here's our history study for this year. We have an hour to study today. Get as much done as you can in this hour. And just manage it hour by hour, day by day through the school year, encouraging the children and helping the children to get done as much as they can. If the children work hard and do well, tell them, if you work hard every day and you work to get as much done as you can in the hour, I'll give you an A in this subject. If you don't work hard in this subject and I have to make you work every day and you don't get very much done because of your effort, I'm going to give you a lower grade. And when it's time to put a grade on that course, you as the parent have the authority to use your personal judgment and put a grade on that transcript. And this is your parental authority in practice. You can say, no, I told you every day to work on your math work and you never did. You always would ignore it. I would have to force you every day to do your math work. Half the days you only worked for 15 or 20 minutes and then you started fooling around and wouldn't work on your math. So I'm going to give you a C in freshman math. It's my school. I'm the administrator of this school. I'm giving you a C in math. And that will lead to two possible options. The child may say, I'm sorry for doing that, and I want to make it up. And you can agree as the parent, since it's your school and you're the administrator, you can agree that if the child works all summer to make up for the wasted time during those 180 school days, you'll raise that from a C to a B, or maybe even to an A, depending on how well he does. And that will be the grade on his transcript for that course. Your parental judgment as the school administrator in your school. It's that simple to prepare the transcripts. It's that simple to prepare the diploma. It's that simple. Now, once you have this transcript work done, once you have this diploma done, and again, it's just a matter of time, the actual academic goals for your children's education, the actual academic objective standards for your children's education can all be handled separately and naturally, not subjected to this modern diploma and transcript system. Your real Christian goals in education can be managed outside of that. And this is where, again, the Classical Liberal Arts Academy can really help, because our system is designed to serve this real education model and allow homeschooling to be all that it can be. So to get the high school transcript and to get the high school diploma, a student doesn't need to study classical ethics. A student doesn't need to study the Baltimore Catechism. A student doesn't need to study sacred scripture or natural philosophy or classical geometry. But as a Christian parent, these are goals that we want to fulfill. But the modern system, the modern diploma, the modern transcript doesn't concern itself with these studies. We can manage our children's real studies really outside of that system. And the online courses in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, they allow you to track your children's progress in real courses and real studies objectively, regardless of time. Your children can study all year round and just work one task at a time, one lesson at a time through Classical Liberal Arts Academy courses. And you can keep that real academic progress separate from the artificial transcript and diploma requirements. When the time comes at the end of your child's education, you can put together transcripts and a diploma that reflect not only the modern studies that have been completed, but all of the additional work that's been completed as well. And even better, you can have us in the academy provide some third-party references for your children's studies, which are very important in homeschooling. So it's not just you and your children. You can also have some third-party input that didn't direct your children's education, but can testify to the quality of the child's work, because the child has completed lessons in our system, and that's objective academic quality. So make sure you understand that the transcript is a matter of time requirements and your parental judgment of the quality of your children's work. I can talk more about that in detail if you'd like more help to understand how you would make that judgment, how you would organize that transcript. But what I want you to understand is that it's very simple to manage. And what's actually most important is that you simply keep a schedule by which you fulfill the time requirements, because that's all that's really required for the modern high school diploma. Don't begin to think that every single student who gets a high school diploma is getting A's and B's in honors classes. That's not true. There are kids in level 4 who are just sitting there staring out the window, and as long as they don't fail, they're getting the same diploma. Now, what separates the students will be their transcripts and other information that they'll submit with a college application, let's say. But those things are separate. That's a separate discussion. I want you to understand as a homeschooling parent what a diploma really is and how you can easily manage your children's education at home and give them a diploma. And as for the transcript, how you can fill out the content on the transcript and assign grades based on your own personal judgment. And you can make your children conscious of their accountability to your parental authority, not some goofy homeschool program that assigns them grades and tells them what their grade is, and you as the parent just pretend that that's some kind of real number or figure. You as the parent can tell your children, I will determine your grade based on how you study, based on whether you obey my instructions as your parent, based on whether you make the best possible use of your time. I will determine what your grade is, and my judgment will be on your transcript that you will use if you apply to a college or university. Your GPA will be determined by your parents, who are the administrators of your school, and this homeschool is a real school. Parents need to exercise this authority. And if parents will do so, they'll see that a lot of these problems in modern families go away because the children are accountable to their parents for everything. And that's how it should be. That's how it should be in a family. Don't blame modern society for the problems with schools and children's disrespect for parents. Parents make that situation possible by neglecting their duty and surrendering their parental authority. If you keep hold of that authority and you take responsibility for that work, you will retain that relationship with your children, which they need for their moral development in life. So that's a lot to think about. I think this discussion will provide us with a launching pad into more detailed discussions on these subjects. It may have been a little bit chaotic because I'm talking about this with no script or any prepared message. I just want to present these concepts to homeschooling parents and ask you to start thinking about them and start understanding how you can maintain your authority as parents, fulfill your responsibility to educate your children, and avoid being sucked into these errors that plague modern homeschools, how you can allow homeschooling to fulfill all of its potential in your family life. There's a lot more to talk about, and I'll start teasing this out in future talks, getting into more detailed discussions of individual pieces of what I've mentioned in this talk. But I think that's enough for you to start thinking about. And if you want to ask any questions, I beg you for questions, because questions that you have, other families have, other listeners and parents have. And if you send me your questions, I can make those questions the topics of subsequent talks, and we can get into this in greater and greater detail, down to the practical details, which I think will be most helpful for parents in the end. So please send me your questions, no matter how silly you think they may be or how practical, send them. I'll answer every single one of them, either in a recorded talk or by just responding to your message. But please, if there's a question that arises, if there's anything you're unsure of, you'd like to talk about it more, you'd like to think about it more, send me the question, and I'll respond to every one. I hope that's helpful. Let's think and pray. God bless.